Yes, as I started earlier, my name's Peter, and I'm the program manager for the fleet support function at the Energy Saving Trust. If you want to just pop it along, Paul, thank you. Fiona's kind of done this earlier, so I won't dwell on it too much. But the slightly more interesting thing there, hopefully, is that we've got some stats there for the number of organisations that we've helped over the last 6 years with fleet advice and decarbonisation consultancy, which is the little team that I'm in. And of the 315 organisations over the last 6 years who've received fleet advice and decarbonisation consultancy, about 140 of those have been local authorities. That's across the whole of the country, not just in the northwest. But so local authorities, as you can see, NHS trusts seem to quite like us as well, and all the other categories of public sector fleets. So if we can just pop along to the next one, please, Paul. In the northwest, I understand there's almost 40 local authorities, plus in terms of public sector, there are NHS trusts, emergency service or blue light fleets, and housing associations. And we've met with around, well, about 2/3 of those over the last 6 years in the northwest, that is, and delivered decarbonisation advice to more than half of those. So it's quite a fair number of you. May not be you personally, it could be one of your current colleagues or former colleagues. Difficult for us to know. So we're fairly well known for what we do in terms of fleet decarb work. And if you can just move that along, please, Paul. Fleet decarbonisation even does matter. 2050, as we know, is a net zero carbon target date for the UK. Most public sector agencies are working towards 2030 as their target date, and some are faring better than others, inevitably. In the background now, we've got the zero emission vehicle mandate, where hopefully 80% of new cars and 70% of vans will be zero emission by 2030. That's new car and new van sales, obviously. Increasing to 100% by 2035. That 5-year gap gives a bit of room for vans to catch up and also for plug-in hybrids to be accommodated. New heavy commercial vehicles up to 26 tonnes are to be zero emission by 2035 and up to 44 tonnes gross vehicle weight by 2040. And in the work that we do in my team, we cover all categories of vehicles except buses. By buses, I mean anything above 17 seats and 5 tonnes of gross vehicle weight, which most of us would normally identify as a large minibus. So we do up to 5 tonne, 17 seat passenger vehicles, and we do anything with commercial vehicles. We think that most public sector vehicles can now be served by battery electric and other low carbon fuel or energy types. There are some obvious exceptions to that, things like fire tenders, some of the very large categories of sweepers and gritters as well, where there are solutions to accommodate that. The whole life costs of running battery electric vehicles are comparable or sometimes less than the current diesel version. I should stress that we occasionally get accused of being biased towards electric vehicles. We're not. We're technology agnostic. It's just that battery electric is usually the most advanced form of alternative power to fossil fuel when you're looking to transition. There are other low carbon fuel types. There's HVO, there's biomethane, there are other gases, some liquid, some gaseous, hydrogen fuel cell. But when you look at all the alternatives, you'll generally find that battery electric has the widest range of types of vehicles available, and are more easily to actually go out and actually order and purchase. So that's why it tends to look like that we like electric vehicles. But as I say, we're not biased. If you can just switch on to the next slide, please, Paul. This slide is all about the key steps in the transition from fossil fuel to zero emission power. So this is typically what we do. This is kind of meat of it, if you like. Tends to form something like a 2-part process. The first part is what we loosely call an options appraisal, and the second part is delivering the strategy. So when we consult with an organisation that wants to do some decarb analysis, The first bit is to consult with the organisation, obviously, and then get some data out of them. So that's looking at vehicle lists, the functions, what do they do, what role does the vehicle do, and getting some information on the vehicles like fuel usage, that kind of thing. From that, we can do a carbon footprint. We can make some comments on low vehicle usage. Sorry, that's low usage of vehicles, I should say. The possibility to downsize vehicles, maybe that kind of thing. And then we look at, do zero emission alternatives actually exist? We look at whole life cost forecasts on vehicle replacements. So how much is it going to cost to change in terms of whether you lease or purchase vehicles? And then we align that with your typical retention periods on vehicles, the dates that vehicles are due to change. In other words, we don't just assume that everything will change on day one. And we look at what the carbon and energy reductions are likely to be based on you transitioning from fossil fuel to ideally a zero emission alternative. So you get a good picture there of what will happen if you make the change. There are always going to be vehicles, as I say, that are harder to decarbonise. If you've got a 19-ton gritter, that's a difficult vehicle to decarbonise. There are some ways around it, but I'm picking on a vehicle that's difficult to do. Then we talk about the strategy. So let's look at the charging infrastructure that you're going to need if you transition to zero emission, and let's say battery electric is the most likely alternative. What import capacity will you need into your location or locations, plural? What types of charge points will you need? Don't assume you're going to need 50 kilowatt rapids all over the place. You might not, because if you've got 10, 12, 14 hours of overnight downtime where the vehicle could be being charged, you might get away with cheaper, lower power charge points. So 7 kilowatt, 11, 22 kilowatt, that kind of thing. Don't assume you need loads of rapid chargers, is the message there. And we will look at the replacement cycles of vehicles. And so we recognise that you won't change them all in one go. I think I might have said that already, but we look at the carbon and energy savings based around the year in which those vehicles are likely to be replaced. So you can see what's going to happen over, a 5, 7, 10-year window. We'll also look at outsourced contract renewals. A lot of local authorities outsource their waste management to an outsourcing company. And a couple recently I've spoken to where one of them outsourced their waste on an 8-year contract only last year. So that runs out in 2031 or 32, I can't remember which it was now, which is actually past their 2030 net zero carbon target date. So, but what they want to look at is, well, if we were to bring that back in house, or if we were to stay with the outsourced provider, what would our charging infrastructure requirements look like if we transition from diesel to battery electric at that point in the future? In other words, they were looking at trying to future-proof the future profile of the fleet, even though it's not all, even though it's some sections of it are actually outsourced. Sorry, is what I'm trying to say. So that's the basis of the work that we do in terms of helping a fleet to decarbonise. So if you can go on to the next slide, please, Paul. That diagram there gives you an idea of the kind of work we look at. That's a week's worth of data on half-hourly energy usage at a location. So what we're looking for there is, well, how much spare capacity is there to recharge vehicles? The red section is the minimum basic energy consumption every single day of the week at that location. The blue bit, just above the red bit, gives an indication of the daily variable use in terms of energy consumption at that location. The light green bit tells you what is available, but that fluctuates during the course of a day. And then the final part of this diagram is the dark green bit, sort of pea green shading. That is the spare capacity that is always available at that particular site. So that gives you an idea of, in that particular instance, that organisation was able to see what charging capacity they had spare, both all of the time and some of the time during the course of a typical 7-day week. And that's a kind of indication of how we do charging infrastructure analysis in terms of seeing what's available now. From that, we can then determine, well, how much more are you going to need, if you need any more. And then we talk about charge points and things like battery storage and dynamic load management, balanced load management, and things like that. So if we just move on to the next slide, I'm conscious that I'm about to run out of time, or have done. That's an indication. I won't go through all of those individually, but if you've not looked at this before, or you're at a very early stage, you might only have 1 or 2 electric vehicles already, that kind of thing. I saw a comment along those lines in the chat. I won't go through all those bullet points, but these are the kinds of people who need to be involved in the conversation. It's not just the fleet people or the procurement people. It's people who might not have been involved with fleet before, people like estates and energy management, people like that. So collaboration is a key part of this process. And if we just move to the next slide, please, Paul. I've put up some case studies there, which might be of interest. They're all from this year. They're all from 2024. We've got a couple of councils. They're not in the northwest, sadly. One is Wiltshire, and a very nice quote there from the head of highways at Wiltshire, and an amazing quote from the one at the bottom. It's almost like I wrote it myself. That's from the Canal and River Trust, which isn't a local authority, but it is a charity. It was actually an agency within DEFRA, if you go back 20 or 30 years, the Canal and River Trust. But that's a nice quote. And then the one in the middle is from Camden Council, one of the London boroughs, and we delivered a quite a complicated piece of work there, partly involving their biomethane station. But so there's some quite interesting quotes there from some organisations that we work with. I think is there one more slide, Paul? Yeah, there's my email address. I should point out, for those of you who met with us before in terms of any fleet advice, we used to, for many years, we delivered fleet advice free of charge because it was funded by Department for Transport. So if you had a fleet report from us going back to about 18 months, 2 years ago, it used to be free because DFT paid for it to be delivered to you. DFT withdrew that funding back at the end of March 2023, and I think their view was that the work was done and that people didn't need any more help with decarbing their fleets. Not sure we agreed with that, because we've carried on offering that service, but it is now chargeable. We can't do it for nothing anymore. But you know, we like to believe we charge sensible rates, and we've still got customers. So I just thought I'd stress that rather than you think it's free. So hopefully that's been of use.